Look at global financial projections today, and you'll see the same pattern everywhere: a sudden, sharp sense of market panic. The prevailing economic fear of the 21st century is built on a single assumption: that when birth rates fall, innovation and growth must inevitably fall with them. Geographically, the decline is near universal. Birth rates have been sliding across all continents for the better part of 7 decades. This chart shows the scale of the slide. Since 1950, the global birth rate has plummeted from 3.78 down to just 1.71 last year. But data from the National Bureau of Economic Research reveals a paradox. Despite these shrinking labor pools, aggregate GDP is not collapsing as predicted. Instead, aging and shrinking populations have historically raised an economy's output per worker. Economists Daron Acemoglu and David Autor have been tracking this disconnect, and their findings suggest the standard model for demographic decline is missing a critical variable. They found that when labor becomes scarce, it triggers an aggressive, compensatory technological response from the market. This suggests that treating a birth rate drop as an automatic economic death sentence ignores the data, requiring us to re-examine how we calculate growth in a shrinking world. To see where this logic leads, look at Japan, the global testing ground for the demographic crisis. For years, the Japanese government maintained a policy of suppression, attempting to halt the population decrease through direct intervention. But demographics eventually hit a mathematical floor, where births can no longer catch up to the rate of death. Japan's 2025 vital statistics illustrate the gap: 671,000 births against 1.59 million deaths. Even if the birth rate doubled tomorrow, the population would still shrink. This occurs because the absolute number of reproductive age women has contracted below replacement capacity. When governments project an illusion of control over these numbers, they risk giving the public false expectations about a recovery that physics simply won't allow. Finite policy resources are being spent on demographic suppression, even though the mathematical leverage point for that strategy is long gone. This brings us back to the central tension. If the physical workforce shrinks, how does the economy avoid a total collapse in GDP? In the standard production function, growth is a product of labor, capital, and total factor productivity. When labor shrinks, output should follow. Researchers first tested if this was offset by more women entering the workforce, but the data showed no significant economic link between that demographic shift and the massive productivity gains we're seeing. They also looked at whether shrinking populations encouraged a transition from low-productivity agriculture to high-productivity manufacturing. Again, the historical transition failed to explain the scale of the productivity growth identified in the study. Instead, the model reveals that total factor productivity and capital stock are doing the heavy lifting. The relationship is precise. Every 1 percentage point drop in the birth rate correlates with a 26.8% increase in GDP per worker. When labor becomes scarce, companies have no choice but to aggressively adopt labor-saving inventions to maintain their margins. This creates a structural pivot toward high-tech exports and a boom in labor-saving patenting. Companies are replacing human hours with mechanical precision, executing tasks at a scale and speed that manual labor can't match. Growth in a shrinking population doesn't rely on finding more people. It relies on the relentless substitution of capital for human labor. If shrinking populations drive technological advancement, then we have to reconsider the logic behind pro-natalist subsidies. Policy often treats the low birth rate as a problem to be solved through direct eradication. But birth rates function like a fever. Throwing cash transfers at families provides a temporary cooling effect while leaving the source of the heat untouched. This diagnostic tree shows the actual cause: structural labor friction. The membership-based corporate model demands total devotion, making balancing a career and child-rearing mathematically impossible for women. Another friction is the assumption that women bear the heavy time cost of domestic labor. When combined with stagnant growth, young families are left with no financial margin for error. In this light, low birth rates are a rational response to an inflexible system that effectively penalizes parenthood. The data requires a pivot. Governments must abandon the idea of demographic control and embrace social adaptation. An effective adaptation strategy relies on 2 specific pillars. The first pillar is a commitment to the technological augmentation and labor-saving patents identified in the Acemoglu research. The second pillar is aggressive structural labor reform designed to dismantle the outdated membership-based employment model. By aligning these two, a nation can maintain its welfare and social support systems even as its tax base contracts. The state must function like a highly adaptive framework, dynamically reshaping itself to fit the changing reality of its citizens. We are entering a permanent era of demographic contraction, but the data proves that contraction is not the same thing as decline. Prosperity will belong to nations that stop trying to engineer their populations to fit the economy and start engineering their economies to fit their populations.